This is Jason Belzer for Athletic Director U. We're here today at the 2017 NACDA convention. I'm joined by Heather Lyke, the new Athletic Director at the University of Pittsburgh, and Chrissi Rawak, the new Athletic Director at the University of Delaware. Thank you for coming with us today.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
So we're going to talk a little bit about being a new Athletic Director and getting your team together, on board, and how do you put down your philosophies. And that's really kind of the first question that we have for you today is, as a new AD, how do you try to get everybody on board and in line with the philosophy and strategy that you have planned out for your programs?
You wanna go first?
Sure.
All right.
It starts with, really two ways, I would say. One is them getting to know you and being really open and transparent about who you are as a leader and what your core values are and how that drives your decisions. And then obviously understanding the culture that you're walking into and what, the people make up your culture. So you've got to spend time getting to know them. And so it's about building relationships from the start. And for me, my core values are pretty clear, and so I share them with them. And those are, integrity always, and powered by passion, meaning you're going to work really hard here if we want to be excellent. And student athlete experience 365. So we're developing the student athlete 365 days a year, but in 365 degrees. Impact people, because we have this unbelievable ability to impact people. Be inspired to innovate, so be curious. And that's one of the hardest things for when you walk into a new organization, is trying to get your team to get to curious. And a lot of times, our job is to define reality. And okay, here's where we are. Now, how do we improve? And so, you hear those terms like, well, we've never really done it that way, or we've tried that once and it didn't work. And so just trying to get your staff to get curious. So when I talk about being inspired to innovate, it means let's challenge ourselves to think differently about what we've been doing. And then my sixth core value is expect to win. And so raising the expectations, Chrissi and I were just talking about, how do you raise those expectations of where they've been, and then, believe in them and instill a level of belief. But from the get-go, it's about building relationships, and then seeing where we want to be, and then obviously then developing the plan on how to get there.
So I would say ditto, honestly, on much of that, and interestingly enough, a lot of our values are similar, some different language, but I am certain with how we define them are very similar: pursuit of excellence, integrity, leadership, inspiration. So coming into Delaware, one of the things that was important to me was understanding where we were and sharing the values that are important to me, but then also with that team, creating our vision, our mission, and our core values collectively, and doing that with them, which was very important because I was the 6th AD in 8 years for Delaware. They have been through a tremendous amount of transition. There wasn't a lot of trust there, and I think that's one of the things that leaders oftentimes don't realize, is that you've got to come in and earn their trust, and I work hard at that every day. You can't just assume because you have the title that they're going to trust you, and that takes time and effort. And I think that by building the things that I've described together, it really helped build trust and give them a voice. And I may not always agree with what they're trying to implement, but there's no question that they know I'm listening. And I'm working hard to understand the curiosity component, that growth mindset. The way you grow is through curiosity and learning how to make mistakes, but learning from them, and not creating a punitive environment where you're being punished for mistakes. You're actually celebrated for those. And so it's a process. I'm a year in and we're still working at it, but a big part of it is earning their trust, building things with people. Our mission is inspiring greatness together, and talking about that every day and thinking about how does every person in that room that touches our student athletes and our campus, how are they involved in that? How do they drive that? How are they responsible for that? And taking it to the core of who they are.
Sure. So Jim Collins, famous management scientist, wrote Get to Great, and in Get to Great he discusses getting people on the bus, getting them in the right seats, and getting the wrong people off the bus. How do you make the determination whether or not someone belongs on the bus in the first place versus being in the wrong seat?
Mm-hmm. Well, you want me to? Yeah. So it comes back to values. I'm a values-driven leader. Principles and values are really important. So if somebody has the same core values as the organization and defines them in the same way and is aligned, I feel like that's the first and foremost. I mean, whenever we interview anybody new, that's a part of our interview process, and we talk about that. So I think understanding where they fit from a values perspective is first and foremost, and then I think understanding what drives them and their passion and the skill sets, and then from there you evaluate, you analyze. I think it's not an initial you jump to a conclusion. I think you have to have the conversations. It's about the relationships, but it's also about at the end of the day, a job needs to be done. So what skills are required and how do they fit? And, are you able to develop those in people? Are they capable? Is it capacity? Is it capability? Is it interest? I mean, all those things are things that you've got to consider as you're making those decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Chrissy's right. The assessment of your staff comes down to, what motivates them, and I have found one thing is like, people who are inherently self-motivated are just people you want on your team. And because if, as a coach, it's draining to have to motivate your student athletes. And as a leader, it can be draining to have to motivate your team. So you want people who are highly driven and highly motivated. And so that means that you've got to make sure that they're passionate about what they do and they enjoy it. And frankly, usually the team, you walk in and you'll have a sense of, they're excited for new ideas and new vision and new leadership, and they're excited to be able to demonstrate their abilities. And then there's some people that are very comfortable, and maybe it's comfortable because they're really good at what they do and they do it extremely well, but it might also be comfortable because they're not held accountable for things. And so, it's kind of working together to say, okay, what do we want to achieve? What are our quantifiable goals and objectives, holding people accountable for those, and hopefully those who are most self-motivated will, again, rise to higher levels of leadership and opportunities because they want to do more. But it takes time. I mean, it's not a knee-jerk decision or anything, but, after a year, they're your team. So you got to assess in that first year to evaluate how people are set up and put them in positions for success.
Well, I was going to ask to that point of assessment, how long do you give somebody? Is it 3 months, 6 months, a year? And do you judge people differently if it's somebody that maybe you brought in versus someone that was already there? And maybe you say to yourself, oh, I don't want to judge people differently. Everyone has the same chance, but maybe there's a little bit of an inherent bias when it's your person versus somebody that's been left over from the existing staff.
Well, every situation's different. Sure. So, you can't say, okay, I'm going to give everybody 2 months to figure this out. Right. But I would just say that, you have to figure out the appropriate, you get a sense, and I never think about like who's left over and who I'm bringing in. And I mean, you have to approach it as we are all one team. And, if you're fortunate to be able to bring people with you, obviously I have, and I think it's a huge benefit because there's automatic trust already instilled, and they understand your work ethic and your leadership style and how to build the team, and they know you a little bit more. But it's not that I give them any more slack from an accountability standpoint in their day-to-day operation. They just come in as a natural leader because they know the style, and you want to bring dynamic, you want to inspire, you want to have the most dynamic team that you can possibly have. I mean, that's a part of it. But I guess there's not really a set time that you have to evaluate people. I mean, I think you give them hopefully enough direction and enough communication with them that you set the expectations, and then people sometimes self-select, or they realize that this isn't what I signed up for, or they get inspired, and that's the most exciting chance. I mean, when I took over at Eastern Michigan, I mean, the people that just had never been, you say thank you, and they're like, to the facility guys, and they're like, no one has ever thanked us once, or I had a staff member who was leaving, and I was like, whoa, where are you going? And he was actually going to be a faculty member because he loved the area and his family loved the area, and I'm like, well, what are you doing? He's like, I'm just uninspired. I'm like, oh no, we'll inspire you. I'll make sure you. And he was a brilliant leader. And so there's so many neat stories that do happen, and that it's just a chance to get to know people and build the team, and that's really what it's about.
Yeah, I would echo what Heather said, and I think it is interesting when you walk in, and I remember hearing this not directly, but through the grapevines, well, she didn't hire me, she's, I'm not her coach. I'm like, I'm walking in, you're all my people, right? We're in this together, yes, you are, and to her point, there isn't a timeline. I do think that you see who's going to get on board and who's not. I mean, I think they raise their hands. It's very clear. I think the idea of bringing people in that know you is and have the skills to do the work is really important. And I would say what's been helpful at Delaware is they've helped others understand me, right? So they can be helpful within the organization as a whole to translate. So what does that mean when she does that or says that? And that builds camaraderie within that group. And I hold that team, my leadership team, incredibly accountable for working together and working in a very connected and networked way and supporting each other and supporting each other's teams. And so it just feeds that. And I think there's a lot of positive that comes from that.
So you come in, get the right people in the right places, and now you're thinking about instilling your strategies and processes. How long do you wait to do that? Is there things that you do right away? Are there things that you wait and see how your staff adjusts, the university community adjusts, that you have some rapport with administration? What's kind of the right time or the Goldilocks time, so we'll say, to start putting down the nuts and bolts of what you're going to do and maybe wait on some of the bigger things?
Yeah. Well, again, I don't know that there's a set prescribed method. Timing is important. So in my first AD job, I accepted it. I mean, I was on the ground August 1st. So it's very hard to really make a lot of changes for the upcoming year. So it was more of an assessment time. At Pitt, I've been really lucky to be there earlier. I started April 1st, and so we have a lot more time to plan for the upcoming year. So we're going to do a lot of strategy planning. Actually, next Friday is just a whole day of planning and focus on the upcoming year. And we've had a chance to build our team, kind of the leadership group, enough to know each other and to be able to get in a room and say, okay, we're not just going to assess this whole year. Let's see what we can do differently right now. So I think timing plays into it a little bit, but you do spend some time. Again, you don't want to be overly reactive, and you want to sort of soak in the culture and understand what has worked really well, what you can keep, what things that you see right away that you're like, ooh, we could really improve in this area, and then balance those two, and understand the community. And as far as big vision projects, it probably takes a year till you get your team in place and set your vision and set your goals, and then you start to think, okay, strategies, where are we from a facility standpoint, what's the culture on campus like, and that sort of thing. Maybe takes about a year to get really your hands around that bigger picture type thing. The other thing is, the relationship with the donors. Those key constituents take time. You don't walk in the door and start, big vision projects without having them engaged and spending time listening to what has worked, what hasn't worked, what they feel are priorities. And so it takes a little bit of time to get to know all those people. And that's a great, listening tour and visiting with the people that have really invested in the university and in the athletic department previously.
Yeah, I would also, again, echo a lot of what Heather said. I think that listening tour, spending that time that first year is really important. Although, you can't just listen; you have to act as well. And I think a big part of it for me it's about process. It's about being clear in your process and inclusive in your process and in the conversations you're having. And making sure that the process is working to align with the strategies that you're beginning to set. And I think doing that, you have a sense of that, and I think the key is knowing that you're directionally correct in those conversations through conversations with your president and your leadership team and donors. It's really not till, I feel like, for us, the second year that we're really going to be able to kind of ground ourselves in the strategies. As I shared with you, I'm reading Playing to Win for the second time, and I can feel that it's the right time for us to be doing this collectively and really understanding what are our winning aspirations, where are we going to play, how are we going to win, capabilities and management structures, and that's what I mean by process, right? Because just having strategy to have strategy isn't necessarily helpful. I also think that a big part of this too is just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so really being aware of that and understanding too, and this is something that I have to oftentimes be cognizant of, and I surround myself with people that know this about me, is like I'm pretty comfortable with change and like it. I actually thrive in it. But that doesn't mean that everybody around me is, and being cognizant of that and recognizing and understanding that, okay, I need to slow down a little bit because I don't want to blow people up is important. And there are some times where I'm like, we just got to go, right? And so just being aware and using judgment and a sense of thoughtfulness and being incredibly communicative is also a part of the process as well.
Great segue. How do you communicate with your staff, your constituency when you're implementing strategic decisions? Does it start from the top down? Is it president first, or does it start from your closest staff and then, or is it both at the same time?
Yeah, I think the way, as I just described, kind of we've worked together is that we've built this together. So, they're aware of what's coming and they are, I've had the president come and talk about what he has, the expectations, the aspirations he has for athletics. So the conversations, and I really feel like that's what they are. It's conversations about the work that we're doing together. And so communicating is often, so there's no surprises. There's no surprises for folks. As these things are coming into play, I'm very easily able to, because we've talked about it, to circle back and say, remember when we had these conversations, this is how this is all playing out now. And because of the involvement that we have, together, there aren't surprises.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've got to be very intentional about the communication, and it's a challenge because you tend to just run hard and you do things, and have we told everybody about this? And Chrissi's idea about building it together is the right way. I mean, because then people feel included, they feel more bought in, and you're not telling them what's happening; they are a part of what's happening. And certainly your chancellor or president is essential in understanding the vision and alignment of leadership. I don't know that there's anything more important in order for us to really accomplish what we want, is to make sure that we're in alignment with what the chancellor's vision is for athletics and the impact that it can have on the university. So that's critical, but yeah, as often as you can have, we call them platforms for communication. So whether it's all coaches meetings, all staff meetings, set times. I mean, and we hold them, and they're not just, we don't kill time just to kill time and gather people just to gather people. We are intentional, and we have messages we want to make sure people are aware of, and opportunities for them to interact and talk. And so if you don't create the platform for communication, it just doesn't happen, And so I know you tend to all be busy, and we're in different, 6 different buildings and all that sort of thing, but you've got to make it happen, and then people start to come together a little bit more when you actually, physically make them come together too.
I would actually say, I think you would agree with this. Communication does happen when you don't communicate, and it's usually filled with, this vacuum is filled with misunderstandings,
miscommunication,
and it's just bad, right?
Yeah.
So it's not good for anybody.
Right.
So it happens. It's just not in the way that you ultimately want it to happen. So to Heather's point, that intentionality, which I think about as process, is so important. And you got to wake up every day thinking about it. It's really important.
Well, Heather, Chrissi, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Likewise.
Yes.